Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk, your own holy home for horror. I'm your host, as always, Barry, and today's podcast is going to be devoted to a golden age slasher movie released in 81, and that is Hell Night. Now, recently I've been focusing on a lot of the golden age slasher films. I've covered such films as The Burning, The Prowler, The Funhouse, Terror Train, very recently My Bloody Valentine, and Hell Night's one to add to the list. Now, I'm just going to say this, that Hell Night is a slasher movie that I really do like. It's not one of my personal favourites. I don't really regard it as one of the best. But it's certainly one that I feel deserves more attention. It's one that doesn't really get talked about that much. You know, and as I said, released in 81, this is the year that slasher movies were being churned out left, right and centre. And, you know, this film is quite notable, if you will, for starring Linda Blair. Obviously, you know, one of the big stars of, you know, one of the biggest horror movies of all time, that being The Exorcist. You know, the granddaddy of demonic possession films, one of my all-time favourite horror movies. And, you know, she's actually in this film. And I believe that Frank Darabont actually had one of his earliest film credits for this film as a production assistant. Frank Darabont, of course, went on to become a showrunner for the early seasons of The Walking Dead, obviously directing films like The Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, 2007's The Mist. And, you know, the financier of this film, the distributor, Irwin Yablans, a producer, of course, notable for the likes of Halloween and 79's Tourist Trap. And Hell Night, you know, what I really like about this film is the gothic atmosphere. I really do like that old dark house aesthetic that this film has, which really does kind of make it stand out from the crowd from so many other slasher films from the period. Much like with Terror Train, you know, the setting for that film, My Bloody Valentine, you know, being set in a small town, but, you know, kind of like the last half of the film actually being set within the mine. This film has a setting to me that really stands out. I love the old dark house aesthetic, that very kind of gothic atmosphere. Now, I'm just going to say this as well. Linda Blair is no Jamie Lee Curtis. I believe that she was actually nominated. I'm not sure if she won, but she was actually nominated for a Golden Raspberry for this film. Now, I'll admit, Linda Blair, okay, I highly doubt she's listening. I don't really rate her as an actress, in all honesty. As I said, she's in a great horror movie in The Exorcist. We're not really going to talk about Exorcist 2, The Heretic. I'm not really a fan of that. But, yeah, I really didn't kind of feel her acting comes across as very kind of stilted and wooden. But anyway, you don't really watch these films for Oscar-worthy performances or anything. Now, I think for some people out there, this movie is probably a little bit too leisurely paced, certainly in the middle act. You know, there's a lot of kind of skulking around in this old dark house. And I'm just going to say this, that I really liked the kind of build-up to this film, actually. You know, to become a member of Alpha Sigma Rho, you basically have to spend the night in Garth Manor. And 12 years ago, prior to this, Raymond Garth killed his entire family one by one, then committed suicide. And we actually get the history before they go into this house. And I really do like that kind of setup that this film has. That Raymond and Lillian had 4 children. Morris was basically a mongoloid. Suzanne was hideously deformed. And we hear that basically they're all deformed. And Andrew, the last born, apparently his body was never found, and he actually witnessed the murder of his entire family by his father, who then proceeded to commit suicide. And it is still believed to this day that he's actually in that house somewhere. And then we get this kind of ominous, creepy music, and I really do like that kind of setup. And of course, this family lived in a kind of a state of isolation. So there's no electricity, there's no phone, no water, presumably. And yeah, so they have to spend the night. And of course, you know, it isn't really too long. Well, that's the thing, actually. This film actually does take a while to get to the first kill. The first kill actually occurs about almost half an hour into the movie. And I like the fact that these characters that are actually hazing them, actually go out of their way to really try and scare them while they're in there. They've set up all these screaming sounds, these noises. There's actually a skeleton that comes out of the closet when this guy actually opens it and that. And there's actually this pretty cool little trick that one of them actually utilises, where he puts on this mask. And as she turns on the light, over the mirror, and, the reflection is his kind of scary face wearing this mask. But it's funny because she doesn't even notice it because she's too busy looking at a spot, I think it is, on her face. There's actually a moment that made me jump, when I first watched this, where one of the characters just opens the door and this snake comes popping out. It's quite a little kind of jump scare. So they're actually doing anything they can to try and scare these characters. They even use this kind of, I'm not sure what it's actually called, like I can't think of the word, like a projector, to make it look like this ghost is coming towards Linda Blair's character and that. But these characters themselves, actually, it's not long before they start getting killed off one by one. One of the women she's pulled under, presumably, under this trapdoor, and she's actually beheaded. We don't actually see the head come off, but it's clearly it's a decapitation. The next guy. Now, this is the thing. We don't really see that much of the killer himself until nearing the end of the movie. We kind of see his silhouette and his shadow and all that. But we don't see a huge amount of the killer, and I quite like that fact. I'm kind of a less is more kind of guy. And, one of the guys, actually, who seems to be really kind of relishing this scaring these teens. I think the other guy actually says to him, I think you enjoy this a bit too much. And he gives us his kind of maniacal laugher. He actually gets his head twisted round. His neck just gets completely broken and quickly shows us that this killer has superhuman strength. And this killer is certainly a towering presence. Now, quickly get onto the characters in this film. I think all of the four main characters are generally likeable. I don't think there's any of them four that are actually unlikable. The character to me that really stood out is actually the first victim of these four, the blonde-haired girl who's British. And she really kind of stands out because it's not too often that you actually see a British character in an American or Canadian slasher film. Certainly not back within that time period. And she's kind of the kind of, the party girl, the whorish kind of character, if you like. But I find her very likeable. I like the fact that they're not supposed to be smuggling alcohol in this thing, and she smuggles them in, and like Linda Blair says to her, did you not get searched? And she's like, well, yeah, but they found this, they found that, but they clearly haven't found the other thing, which was basically tied to her lower leg. And it's quite funny, actually, because one of the other guys, one of the four main characters, I believe his name is Seth. There's kind of a running joke, if you will. A couple of times in the film, she actually calls him Wes. She seems to think his name is Wes, but his name is actually Seth. And, yeah, she gets killed. We don't actually see the kill. But basically, they have sex. And he goes off to the toilet, comes back, and it's a decapitated head. And what actually kind of makes me... There's a shot just before that where she's lying, on the bed. He's left. And we get this POV, the killer's creeping up to her on the bed. And then we get this shot of the killer just looming over her. It's kind of a creepy little shot because that's like the first kind of proper kind of glimpse we actually get of the killer, I'd say. And he comes back, and what's really funny, he actually panics and goes running to the other two in that. And they're essentially kind of locked in because they've got this fence outside that's really high and spikes at the top. Now, what actually makes me laugh is Seth's character, who I do like, by the way, and I'll get to why. He comes running back and he's like, they're like, who's dead? And he's like, oh, that's a sorority chick. He's like, he doesn't even know her name. They've been like talking, and getting it on during the course of this, this night and stuff. He doesn't even know what the girl's name is. It's just like, it's the sorority chick. I come back, she's dead, the whole world's gone crazy, gone mad or whatever. And he actually manages to get out. Now, what I commend him for, actually, is there's probably a lot of people that would get out of that situation and do a runner. That's it. They're saved. They've probably got no reason to care about the rest of these people, left in this house. But what does he do? He goes to the police station and actually tries telling them. And then when the police don't obviously believe him because they believe it's a fraternity prank. And you can't blame them for thinking that. You know, this kind of thing goes on all the time. Much like with Halloween. You know, when Laurie Strode is running for Myers and, you know, she's banging on these houses and stuff, people think it's a Halloween prank. Nobody takes her seriously. And he actually steals a gun from the police station. I mean, I never thought a gun would be so easy to steal in a police station. Just waltz in there and just take whatever you want. But anyway, and he actually makes all his way back. He actually goes back to try and save them. And I commend him for that. Because he could have quite easily been a selfish prick, excuse my language. And, you know, he's saved and he's out of harm's way. But now he goes back and he tries to save the day. And, you know, getting to his kill, it kind of reminded me of The Shining almost. You know, he goes back, you know, with The Shining, I believe his name was Dick. I'm probably saying that wrong. It was Scatman Crothers' character. He goes all of his way to the Overlook Hotel only to get killed. To get an axe, you know, courtesy of Jack Torrance and that. But he goes back and he ends up shooting. We get this kind of jump scare moment. The killer jumps out and he actually shoots the guy. Shoots the killer, presumed to be dead. And there's kind of a jump scare. He comes out of the water. He's not dead. You know, these guys were almost always impossible to kill in these films. And he shoots him. And then he goes in. And then we realise, hang on a sec, there's two killers. There's actually two. And I believe he actually gets shot with his own gun. And, you know, and kind of getting back to, like, Linda Blair's character. Now, the guy, I can't recall the character's name, actually, but the guy that's, you know, trying to put the sweet moves on her. Again, I find him really likeable, and I believe I'm pretty certain it's him that actually injured himself during the film and actually ended up with a limp. I'm sure it's him. Or there was another character that was actually involved with an accident, and they were actually limping during the course of the movie, and that was actually a real injury. And I just want to quickly say as well that I believe this was the last film. It's quite notable that this was the last film to actually be released by Compass International Pictures as well. It was their last movie. And I think the majority of the film actually was shot in 3 locations. I think the outside of Garth Manor, which, as I said, I think is a great claustrophobic setting. It was actually shot at a mansion in California, and the inside was filmed in a residential home in California, Pasadena, which is actually, Pasadena, of course, is where Halloween was actually filmed. I think the setting for Garth Manor is actually now a museum in Redlands. And it was turned into a museum, I think, not long after filming. But yeah, what I like about Hell Night is really kind of the setting, and I like the fact that it's not a film either that's kind of overtly sexual. For some people, I'm sure this film isn't graphic enough. You know, this movie isn't overly gory or anything like that. I mean, we see a decapitated head. One of the characters who is actually thrown from a window. The thing is, in this movie, I really rooted for all 4 characters to survive. Because, as I said, I don't actually think the writing in this movie is bad at all. And, you know, I like, for example, the kind of little chemistry we get in the bedroom between Seth and the blonde-haired girl when he's talking about his surfing and he mentions about, like, 12 inches. You're like, ooh, 12 inches. It's... And then basically, obviously, yeah, it's not long before she ends up dying. But I think Hell Night's a pretty solid slasher film. Now, I don't actually understand as to who the second killer is. Now, I'm guessing it must be Morris. I'm assuming it's Morris. Because I believe one body was actually never found when they actually checked. Now, we actually see that there's a moment towards the end of the movie. We get this kind of extended chase sequence, which is very much kind of a staple of the slasher genre. Anyone that's a slasher fan knows that. And I believe it was Jamie Lee Curtis's chase in Terror Train that really wanted them to kind of do this extended chase. You know, for this film, and we quickly come to learn that there's all of these underground tunnels, that there's basically this whole kind of labyrinth underneath the house, and we get kind of a chase through that, and there's actually a hedge maze in it as well, which was actually brought in as there was actually no garden maze on the mansion property. So that was actually something that was brought in for the movie, just a year after The Shining, by the way. So yeah, we get kind of like, an extended kind of skulking scene, if you will, with one of the characters going through there, and he ends up getting killed with, I believe it's a scythe. He actually gets impaled. Now he's actually got the keys, and later on in the movie they do actually, I can't remember what character it is. I'm not sure if it's Pete, but one of the characters actually finds his body, but then obviously forgets about the keys and that. But that would have obviously given him. I mean, I still kind of wonder why they didn't all try to get over that railing. I'm sure they possibly could have. I know it was hard work, and they're not exactly athletes and stuff. But again, that would, I suppose, diminish the film if they all got out too quickly and that. But in regards to the second killer reveal. I'm assuming it must be Morris, because we're kind of led to believe there's one killer, it's Andrew, but it actually turns out there's two. And of course, he himself, the car doesn't start initially, which again is very much a staple of, the slasher genre and horror films in general, if you will. And he ends up getting impaled. Now, a scene earlier in the film that kind of like, it made me want to fill in the gaps, if you will. It's when they're actually, I forgot her name, Linda Blair. When Linda Blair actually says, do you believe in ghosts? You believe this whole story about Garths and all this and that. And she actually says, when I was a kid, I saw a witch. I was actually half expecting to say, look, well, when I was a kid, I was demonically possessed. I was projectiling pea soup and my head was doing a 360 or whatever. So, yeah, she's obviously superstitious in that, if you will. But, I mean, Linda Blair doesn't ruin the movie or anything like that. I just don't particularly rate her as an actress. I mean, as I said, she's no Jamie Lee Curtis or anything like that. Her acting seems a little stilted at times. But overall, I think it's a slasher film that certainly deserves more attention. I think the whole filming of the movie actually took 40 days, and I think they actually went over budget. I think they had to spend something like, I'm not sure if it was 70 or 700,000 or something over budget and that. So, I think that overall, I mean, also with the underground tunnels, which again, I think really kind of adds to the chase sequence near the end. I'm really kind of rooting for these characters. Actually, all of the other characters more than Linda Blair, which is odd because she's the final girl. And I will say this as well. Now, the composer's name, I believe, is actually escaping me, or I think it might be Dan Wyman. I do like the music in this film. I mean, it's no Halloween or Friday the 13th or anything like that, but there's a really good score that accompanies the scenes really well on occasion, I find. And the guys that actually played the Garth Killers, now, I don't believe they're actually listed on the credits, but I believe they're German nationals, and they could actually speak very little to no English, and that one of them actually died very shortly after the release of the film. I've not actually looked into who these guys are exactly, but one of them certainly is a very towering presence, I think Linda Blair actually said that the daily shoots for this film as well lasted from 5 o'clock in the morning to 11 at night. And they were basically living on a double-decker bus, which had been rented by the producers. They were doing long shoots for quite a long time for this movie. And this film does have a bit of a cult following, certainly. It's not even as well known as My Bloody Valentine, or certainly not talked about as much as My Bloody Valentine, or even The Prowler, I'd say. I don't put it, to me, this isn't it's not up there with My Bloody Valentine, but this is still a slasher movie that actually deserves more attention. And I've just actually checked, she didn't win the Golden Razzie, but she was actually nominated for it. So yeah, I think Hell Night, good setting. I wouldn't say it's really a film where any of the kills really kind of stand out, if you will. To me, it's really the setting and just the gothic atmosphere. And, in this film, much like Madman in a way, we get this kind of, to use the term, kind of a mongoloid, a hideously disfigured killer. It's not a masked killer in this movie. And I just like how it kind of took us back to the kind of gothic age of horror, in a sense. And there's a shot in the film, actually, that I really like as well. It's where Linda Blair and the character's name is escaping me. They're actually sitting there by the bed, they're talking, and in the background we actually see, I believe it's kind of under the rug, a figure rising up behind them. It's that whole kind of like look behind you moment. And you know, the killer gets attacked with I believe it's a pitchfork and that, and then the killer goes down, and that's where we realise there's a trapdoor, and they understand, you know, they discover this labyrinth of tunnels underneath the mansion. I really like that moment. It's kind of creepy, you know, seeing this killer rise up and that. But yeah, so I mean, that's pretty much all I really want to say regarding Hell Night. I think it's a good slasher film. I don't think it's one of the very best. But it's certainly worth a watch for the die-hard slasher fans out there, you know. And obviously it's one of them standalone slasher films, much like a lot of them actually. In 81 we saw a lot of slasher movies that didn't get sequels. I think the most deserving of them would be My Bloody Valentine, which we've actually got a fan-made film coming out soon, called Valentine Bluffs, which I'm really looking forward to. I actually spoke to one of the co-producers on it recently, and yeah, I'm very much a passion project for everyone that's working on that movie, and I'm really looking forward to it. But 81 did see a lot of slasher films that are standalone movies. I mean, we had Halloween 2, Friday the 13th Part 2 that year, you know, but there was the likes of, obviously, The Burning, My Bloody Valentine, I know Terror Train was the year before, that was 1980. You know, obviously with The Burning, obviously the killer is actually killed at the end of the movie, and obviously the killer is killed in this film as well. But whereas My Bloody Valentine is a bit of a rarity, because the killer actually gets away. So it was one of them films that was kind of screaming out for a sequel, if you will. But yeah, anyway, that's it for today. Thanks a lot to everyone that listened, and I'll be back again soon to haunt you and torment you. And I just want to give a couple of shout outs. Zoe Crawford, a YouTuber who basically covers pretty much all things within the realm of geekdom. Matt Facci, also a fellow YouTuber who generally devoted to horror. Really good guy. His stuff is worth checking out. As I said, we've got a fan-made film, Valentine Bluffs, coming out soon as well. That's certainly worth checking out. Any help there is hugely appreciated. And The Sawyer Massacre, Steve Merlo as well, another fan-made film. And hopefully Steve Merlo should actually be coming on the channel sometime soon to talk about the project. So that's it for today. Thanks a lot to everyone that listened, and I'll be back again soon to haunt you and torment you. Take care.